The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. Picture this: a young man in his 20s boarding a ship for a 5-year adventure around the world. He's not some swashbuckling explorer hunting for treasure. He's actually a quiet, thoughtful guy named Charles Darwin, just trying to understand the natural world. But aboard the HMS Beagle, he stumbled upon something extraordinary. He discovered fossils of massive extinct creatures lying right next to bones of smaller, similar animals that were still alive. Then, on these tiny volcanic islands called the Galapagos, he noticed something weird. Finches on one island had slightly different beaks than finches on another, and each beak was perfectly designed for the food available on that particular island. Now, these weren't just random observations. They were puzzle pieces. Darwin called it the mystery of mysteries. How did all this incredible variety of life come to exist? For the next 22 years after his voyage, he worked quietly, almost secretly, on his theory. He filled countless notebooks, wrote letters to scientists and farmers, and studied everything from barnacles to pigeons, all to piece together one revolutionary idea. He was actually terrified of the reaction his theory would cause. But then, out of nowhere, he received a letter. Another scientist named Alfred Russel Wallace, working on the other side of the world, had independently figured out the exact same thing. The jig was up. Darwin finally published his masterpiece in 1859, On the Origin of Species. The book didn't just make waves. It created an absolute tsunami of controversy that's still going strong today. People called it the theory that shook the world. Why such a big deal? Because Darwin proposed that all life on Earth, from the tiniest insect to you and me, is connected. We're all descendants of ancient ancestors, shaped over millions of years by something he called natural selection. Today we're diving into this groundbreaking book together. But don't worry, this isn't going to be some boring lecture. We're going to uncover the fascinating story behind the science. By the end, you'll understand the surprisingly simple engine that drives all life on Earth. You'll see the world not as a random collection of creatures, but as this grand unfolding story of survival and adaptation. And you'll grasp the one idea that connects you, me, the birds outside your window, and creatures living in the deepest oceans into one magnificent family tree. So where do you even start when you want to explain the entire history of life? Darwin knew his idea was radical, so he began not in exotic jungles or ancient fossils, but somewhere everyone could relate to: the farm. He starts with something called variation under domestication. Just think about dogs for a second. A tiny Chihuahua and a massive Great Dane are technically the same species. They can even breed together. But look at them, they're wildly different. Or consider pigeons. Darwin was actually obsessed with pigeons. He joined London pigeon clubs and studied the incredible variety that breeders had created. He describes the English carrier pigeon, with its long beak and large eyelids, the short-faced tumbler with a beak almost like a finch, the pouter with its enormous inflatable crop, and the fantail with 30 or 40 tail feathers instead of the usual 12. Here's the kicker. If you showed these birds to a naturalist who'd never seen them before and said they were wild, they'd probably classify them as completely different species, maybe even different genera. Yet every pigeon breeder knew they all came from one ancestor, the common rock pigeon. How did this happen? Through something Darwin calls selection. For generations, humans have picked the individuals with traits they liked, a slightly longer beak here, a slightly fancier tail there, and bred from them. Nature provides the variations, and humans add them up in directions useful to them. Sometimes this is deliberate, a conscious effort to create a new breed. But more often, it's what Darwin calls unconscious selection. Someone just tries to keep their best dogs or fastest horses, breeding from the strongest without any grand master plan. Yet over centuries, this slow, steady process dramatically improves and modifies the breed. This was Darwin's opening move. He established a powerful truth: selection can produce massive change. With this foundation laid, he turns from the farm to the entire natural world and asks a huge question: is there a similar power at work in nature? To answer that, he first needed to show that variation, the raw material for selection, also exists in the wild. In his chapter on variation under nature, he shows that it absolutely does. No two individuals of the same species are ever exactly identical. These small individual differences are the first steps toward new varieties. He points out that the most widespread and common species tend to produce the most varieties. Where there's more life, there's more variation. Okay, so we have variation in nature, but what's the selecting force? Who or what is playing the role of the farmer in the wild? Darwin's answer is the cornerstone of his entire theory. He calls it the struggle for existence. It's an idea he borrowed from economist Thomas Malthus, who observed that human populations tend to grow faster than their food supply. Darwin applied this principle to all living things. Think about it like this: every single organism, from an elephant to a blade of grass, has the potential to reproduce at an exponential rate. Darwin calculated that even the slow-breeding elephant, if every one of its offspring survived and reproduced, would cover the earth with descendants in less than 1,000 years. A single plant producing just 2 seeds a year would yield 1,000,000 plants in only 20 years. Obviously, the world isn't overrun with elephants or any single plant. So what's stopping them? Destruction. Since way more individuals are born than can possibly survive, there must be a constant, recurring struggle for existence. And this isn't always dramatic fighting, tooth and claw. Darwin uses the term in a large and metaphorical sense. A plant on the edge of a desert struggles against drought. A seedling struggles with other seedlings for light and soil. A species struggles against winter's cold, against predators, against diseases. He paints this vivid picture of an unseen war happening all around us. We see nature looking peaceful and beautiful, but we forget that those birds singing are constantly eating insects or seeds, and those same songbirds, their eggs and their young, are being eaten by predators. He gives this incredible example of how interconnected life is. In England, red clover depends on bumblebees to pollinate its flowers. The number of bumblebees is limited by field mice, which destroy their nests. And the number of mice is largely controlled by the number of cats. Therefore, Darwin concludes, the number of cats in an area could actually determine how much red clover grows there. This constant struggle for life, this intricate web of dependencies, sets the stage for Darwin's central mechanism. He asks, in this universal battle, which individuals are most likely to survive? It's not random. Any being that varies even slightly in any way that helps it will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. This is the heart of it. He calls this principle natural selection, or, as philosopher Herbert Spencer later put it, survival of the fittest. It's nature's version of the breeder's hand, but it's immeasurably superior to human efforts. Humans select for their own benefit. Nature selects only for the good of the creature itself. Humans act on visible traits. Nature acts on every internal organ, on every shade of difference, on the whole machinery of life. Natural selection, he writes, is daily and hourly examining every tiny variation across the world, rejecting those that are bad, preserving and adding up all that are good, silently and invisibly working whenever and wherever opportunity offers, constantly improving each living thing. This process, over vast stretches of time, has 2 major consequences. The first is extinction. As new, improved forms arise, they inevitably replace the older, less improved forms. The competition is most intense between those that are most similar, varieties of the same species, or species of the same genus. So a new variety tends to press hardest on its own parent species, often driving it to extinction. This is why we don't see an endless chain of intermediate forms today. The very process of forming a new species erases the steps that came before it. The second consequence is what Darwin calls the divergence of character. As descendants of a single species multiply, they'll be more successful if they can occupy different niches in nature. Imagine a meat-eating animal. If its descendants vary, some becoming slightly faster to catch deer, others developing stronger jaws for crushing bone, and others perhaps eating less meat and more plants, they won't compete as intensely with each other. The more diversified they become, the more life a single area can support. This explains the branching pattern of life. It's why we have groups within groups, species within genera, genera within families, families within orders. It's not a ladder, but a great branching tree. In a powerful metaphor, Darwin compares all of life to a great tree. The green and budding twigs represent living species, and those produced during former years represent the long succession of extinct species. As buds give rise by growth to fresh buds, so by reproduction it has been with the great tree of life, which fills the earth's crust with its dead and broken branches and covers the surface with its ever-branching and beautiful limbs. Now, Darwin was brutally honest about the problems with his theory. He dedicates several chapters to the difficulties. The first and most obvious is the lack of transitional fossils. If species evolved by incredibly fine gradations, why don't we find innumerable transitional forms in the fossil record? His answer is simple and profound. The geological record is extremely imperfect. He compares it to a history of the world imperfectly kept and written in a changing dialect, and we only possess the last volume. Of this volume, only here and there a short chapter has been preserved, and of each page, only here and there a few lines. Geology doesn't reveal a finely graduated chain because it can't. The vast majority of organisms never fossilize. The conditions for forming thick, fossil-rich rock are rare, requiring slow subsidence of the sea floor. There are immense blank intervals of time between formations. Extinction itself wipes out the intermediate links. The parent form is almost always replaced by its more successful offspring. We shouldn't be surprised at how incomplete the record is. We should be grateful we have one at all. Then there's the problem of organs of extreme perfection and complication. How could something like the human eye be formed by natural selection? Darwin himself admits that supposing the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems absurd in the highest degree. But then he methodically dismantles this apparent absurdity. Reason, he says, must conquer imagination. The key is to find numerous gradations, from a simple and imperfect eye to one complex and perfect, with each grade being useful to its owner. And these gradations exist in nature today. We can start with a simple nerve coated with pigment that can only tell light from darkness. Then a small depression, filled with a transparent substance, acts as a primitive lens, concentrating the light. By preserving and accumulating every slight improvement that results in a clearer image over millions of generations, an instrument as perfect as an eagle's eye could be formed. It's not about one miraculous leap. It's about a million tiny, useful steps. Having laid out his theory and addressed its main challenges, Darwin then brings in a massive body of evidence from all corners of natural history, showing how his theory explains facts that make no sense under the view of independent creation. He starts with geographical distribution. Why do the animals and plants on the Galapagos Islands, hundreds of miles from South America, bear the unmistakable stamp of the American continent? There's nothing in the climate or geology of the islands that resembles the mainland. The answer must be that the islands were colonized by migrants from America, and their descendants were then slowly modified. This explains why island inhabitants are almost always related to the inhabitants of the nearest mainland. It also explains why oceanic islands lack entire classes of animals like frogs and land mammals. Frogs and their eggs die in salt water, and mammals can't cross wide oceans. But bats, which can fly, are found on almost every island, often as unique species. This makes perfect sense if islands are populated by occasional colonists, but makes no sense if each species was specially created for its location. Next, he turns to morphology, the study of form. This is the unity of type. What could be more curious than that? The hand of a human, formed for grasping, that of a mole for digging, the leg of the horse, the paddle of the porpoise, and the wing of the bat should all be constructed on the same pattern, and should include similar bones in the same relative positions. Under the theory of creation, this is just a curious fact about the plan of the Creator. Under Darwin's theory, the explanation is simple: it's inheritance. All these creatures descended from a common ancestor, which had a limb built on that general pattern, and the structure has been modified for different purposes in its various descendants. Then there's embryology. Why do the embryos of mammals, birds, lizards, and snakes look so incredibly similar in their early stages? Why does the embryo of a land-living mammal have gill slits like a fish? Darwin's theory offers a powerful explanation. He argues that variations tend to appear later in life and are inherited at a corresponding age. This leaves the early embryo relatively unchanged. The embryo thus becomes a picture, more or less obscured, of the ancestor of all members of the same great class. The gill slits in our own embryonic development are a relic, a whisper of a distant, water-breathing ancestor. Finally, he looks at rudimentary organs. Nature is full of useless or nearly useless parts. The teeth in fetal whales that never break through the gums, the wings of some beetles sealed shut under their wing covers, the tiny, useless leg bones in some snakes. Under the view of creation, these make no sense. Why create a useless part? But under the view of descent with modification, they're perfectly understandable. They're the remnants of organs that were useful to an ancestor. They've been reduced by lack of use over many generations, but are still retained through the power of inheritance. They are, he says, like the silent letters in a word, useless in pronunciation, but serving as a clue to its origin. In the end, all these diverse fields of study, geology, geography, morphology, embryology, point to the same conclusion. Darwin ends his book with one of the most beautiful passages in all of science. He asks us to imagine a tangled bank full of different plants, singing birds, flitting insects, and crawling worms. These elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other, have all been produced by a few simple laws acting around us. The struggle for life, leading to natural selection, which causes divergence of character and extinction. Thus, he concludes, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is grandeur in this view of life, that while this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been, and are being, evolved. Reading The Origin of Species is like getting a completely new pair of glasses. Suddenly, everything clicks into place. What once seemed like a random collection of creatures becomes a single epic story, stretching back billions of years. The core lesson isn't just about evolution, it's about connection, time, and the relentless creative power of gradual change. In our world today, a world that moves at lightning speed, Darwin's work is a profound reminder of the power of slow and steady progress. Natural selection doesn't work in days or weeks. It works over thousands and millions of years, accumulating tiny advantages until they produce something as magnificent as an eagle's wing or the human brain. It teaches us deep humility. Our lives are just a blink of an eye in this immense story. It also gives us a sense of belonging. We're not separate from nature. We're part of it, one twig on the immense tree of life, connected by invisible threads of inheritance to every other living thing. In an age where we face unprecedented environmental challenges, Darwin's insights have never been more relevant. The struggle for existence and the complex web of relations aren't abstract concepts. They're happening right now, in every ecosystem on the planet. When we remove one species, we shake the entire web in ways we can't always predict, just like removing the cats could affect the clover. Understanding the principles of evolution is crucial to understanding our responsibility as stewards of this planet. So how can we bring these grand ideas into our own lives? Here are a few simple ways to start. First, practice seeing with Darwin's eyes. The next time you walk outside, don't just see a bird or a tree. See a survivor. See a masterpiece of adaptation sculpted by millions of years of struggle. Ask yourself, what tiny advantages did its ancestors possess that allowed it to be here today? What challenges does it face in its own struggle for existence? You'll start to see the world not as a static backdrop, but as a dynamic living drama. Second, embrace the power of slight, successive modifications in your own life. We often think that to change our lives we need a massive, sudden transformation. Darwin's work shows us that this isn't nature's way. The greatest changes come from accumulating tiny, consistent improvements. Whatever you want to become, a better student, a better athlete, a better person, focus on getting just 1% better each day. The long-term results of that slow, steady pressure will be more profound than any short-term dramatic effort. And finally, appreciate the value of variation. Darwin's entire theory hinges on the idea that differences between individuals are the raw material for all progress. In a world that often pressures us to conform, remember that your unique qualities, your quirks, your different way of seeing things, these aren't weaknesses. They're sources of strength and innovation. Just as in nature, it's diversity that allows life to thrive and adapt in a changing world. That was the summary of The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. We've journeyed through the main arguments of this incredible book today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you explore the territory yourself. The true magic of this book lies in following Darwin's careful, methodical train of thought, in seeing how he builds his case piece by piece, and in feeling the weight of his revolutionary conclusions settle upon you. This summary is designed to give you a guide to that journey. If any of the ideas we've explored today, the great tree of life, the unseen struggle for existence, the deep connections that bind us all, have sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning science. It's about understanding your own place in the grand, beautiful, and ever-evolving story of life. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this exploration valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that these journeys are worthwhile and ensures you won't miss our next dive into another world-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.